Welcome to Common Cycle.
Welcome to our Skillshare.
Hey Katie, what do you do before you get on your bike each time to make sure it's safe for riding?
Sure. Well, there's something that I learned that has always stuck in my mind, and it's just a simple checklist you can ask yourself before you get on your bike. It's called ABCQ, or ABC Quick Check, and we're going to show you how to do it.
The first letter is A. A stands for air. Air in your tires. You want to make sure your tires are inflated to their proper range, which means you check the side wall of the tire, find the sort of range, the PSI or pressure per square inch range, and make sure your tire is roughly in that range. Usually without a gauge, you can just sort of give it a squeeze, and if it's, firm but giving a little resistance, then you're good to go.
Well, that brings us to B, which is brakes. And if you don't have brakes, it's going to be scary. So basically what you want to make sure is you don't want your brake lever to be bottoming out on your handlebar. So a good way to measure that is making sure that you have 2 fingers of distance here. Another thing you want to check is for wear on the brake pads. So you should replace it if the brake pads are 1/4 inch or less. And there's definitely a line that if you get to that line, you've gone too far. If you put your front brake on, you want the bike to kind of lift up, and then hitting the back brake, you want to skid your back tire. So to illustrate, that would be a good functioning front brake there, and then we've got a good skid. Another thing that you want to check with your brakes is that the brake pads aren't rubbing on the rim or the tire itself, which may involve you having to adjust your brakes if one side is touching or the other. Sometimes your wheel could be out of true, and that's actually what's causing your issues.
C stands for chain. The chain is what moves the rear wheel and drives the bicycle forward, and it's important that it is well lubricated, clean, and functioning properly. And so one good way to check your chain is to make sure that it's free of rust. If you give it a sort of swipe with your finger and you're getting sort of grease on it, you want to make sure and dry it off. You don't want excess gunk or grime on the outside of your chain. So you can run a rag around as you move the chain backwards, particularly if you can get your bike off the ground. Otherwise, you can flip it around, flip it over rather, and do it while it's upside down. And try to get that excess grease off the chain. If it does need lubrication, you can go ahead and get a bottle of sort of a general lubrication, so not grease, and run it sort of on each chain, just sort of a little bit across the whole chain. Leave it for just a minute to soak in, and then go ahead and do that rag again on the outside. And you want to get it so it's not dirty. That'll keep your bike riding smooth. And what's next?
Q! So Q, or quick, stands for quick release, and it's something that you definitely want to make sure is properly closed on both of your wheels. So this is the quick release here. You're going to want them fully closed towards the back of the bike so they don't catch on anything while you're riding forward. And you'll want to check your front and check your rear. And a good way to know that it's properly closed and a good pressure, I'll say, is when you close it, you should have the mark of the quick release skewer on your hand. How do we finish?
The last thing you do is give a sort of front to back of the bike to make sure everything else is functioning properly. And we're going to go into that in more depth later.
For those of you participating in the Earthfest scavenger hunt this year, we have a trivia question to share with you. Now that you know the answer, head over to ocs.umich.edu/Earthfest to earn points in the Earthfest scavenger hunt.
So next we're going to go over a more comprehensive check of your bike from sort of front to back that you would do if you were purchasing a new bike, if you have a bike that you hadn't ridden in a while, or if your bike had been sort of sitting in perhaps inclement weather. This will help you diagnose problems big and small and know what needs to be addressed either by you or by somebody else. So we're going to start from the rear of the bike and go to the front. And you really want to sort of look at every component piece to make sure that nothing is as it shouldn't be. So we're going to start with the wheel in the back. So we do have plenty of air in the tires. It's holding air. If it was flat when you encountered it, maybe it just needs more air. Tires do lose air over time, and so you want to inflate it and see if it stays overnight. If it does, then you're fine. If it doesn't, you probably have a slow leak or need to replace the tube. This one's great. We're going to check all throughout the bike the bearing systems on the bike. The bearing systems are the hub, the crank, the pedals, the headset, and those have bearings in them which can degrade over time and either have play or friction. And so we're looking for play or friction in any of those bearing systems. And what you do is you move the wheel sort of side to side, and if there's extra movement there, you know that there is an issue. That could be something that can be adjusted by somebody who knows how to do that and be made totally fine. Or it could be that you need either new bearings, some other component in the hub. But you want to make sure there's also no friction. So the wheel should sort of move freely without resistance. And this one is in great shape. As we're doing this, we'll check the brake. We want to make sure the brake's engaged normally. We did that during our ABC quick check, but you might want to take a closer look and make sure that the brakes are moving in tandem. They're moving equivalent distances and sort of hitting the rim surface at the same angle. So your pads wear equivalent. And so there's ways to adjust the sort of pressure on either of these. We won't go into that now, but just know that if you have one that's moving a lot and one that's moving a little, there's ways to sort of adjust the tension on those. So moving to the derailleur, we're going to check to make sure that you can get to all of your gears and that the changing between those gears in the back, they're called cogs, is very smooth. And so I'm just going to run through them. Here we have a grip shift, so something that's integrated into the grip, which pulls cable and actuates the rear derailleur. So I'm going to go through my entire sequence, make sure I can get to all my gears, and I can, which is great. That was pretty smooth. You really want to have one click, one shift all the way up and down the rear cassette. So we're in good shape there. If it wasn't in good shape, there'd be a number of things that you needed to do to address that, but this is about sort of diagnosing issues. So you might see double jumps or hesitation where you actuate the derailleur, but it doesn't move, and that would point to different problems. And we're not going to talk about how to address those. The important thing is that you know what needs to be addressed. If we move further up, we're going to get to, we'll check the quick release before we go too far. It's part of the ABC quick check, but it's important that you can you can make the quick release go closed and open. Sometimes they're very tight. You'd want to address that if it's too tight, but you definitely want to be able to open it and close it with a little bit of pressure to make sure it's safe. So moving up the bike, we're going to look at things like the quick release on the seat to make sure it's in place, and I can sort of see that it's not moving. This helps you move the seat up and down if you need to adjust the height. It's nice to have. It's not necessary. There's some that have just an axle that you can lock with a bolt, but this is nice for quick adjustments. It's also, unfortunately, an easy way to get your seat stolen. We'll continue moving up to the front, what's called the chain rings in the front. So there's 3 chain rings here, and we want to make sure we can get to all 3 of those. So I'm going to shift to each one. And I can get to all of those, which is good. This is shifting really smoothly. With a shifting system like this, you notice in the back there was 1 shift per cog in the back. In the front you have, and that's called index shifting. In the front you have friction shifting. So the derailleur will move across its range in sort of a more fluid fashion. You can see that there aren't set positions necessarily. So you can actually, there can be scenarios where you're rubbing, but you just need to shift a little further. So sometimes noises that develop can be addressed by the shifter. The other thing that we're going to check is another bearing system at the bottom, what's called the bottom bracket. And so the crank itself has bearings in there, and you want to move these from side to side in order to make sure there's no play or friction. So we know there's no friction because we've been sort of using it and it's running really smoothly, but we want to check side to side to make sure there's no additional room in there for the cranks to move, and there's not. The other thing we're going to check is the pedals, also a bearing system, make sure that they're spinning smoothly and there's no play or friction in those. And again, you would just sort of note if there was something happening. So we're looking good. Okay, I'm gonna hand it over to Katie to do the front of the bike.
Cool, so as Nate mentioned, we wanna check the tire, the front tire and the wheel. One thing he didn't mention is checking for true, which is you're trying to identify if there's any wobble in the tire. There's a thing called a truing stand, and you can get it up in the stand and actually address the tension on the spokes, and that will move it from one direction to the other. Again, we want to check that our brakes are actuating, which it looks like they are. And as he mentioned, checking both sides to make sure they're pulling their own weight, as it were. And it does look like we have one that's a little sluggish, if you can see that. This side is not wanting to move as much as the other. So that might be something that we would want to adjust later. Great. Now I'm gonna show you a way that you can check that your headset isn't rocking, and that will be the way to check for play there. So if you actually take your bike and put it on the ground and press your front brake, you're going to kind of try to rock the bike back and forth, and you'll notice immediately if you have any rocking in your fork here, which would not be a good thing, but this seems very firm and in place. With that, you've completed your whole check of your bike, and hopefully it's in full working order, but if not, you know what to address, and either take that on yourself or find somebody who can help you.